Measuring Agile Software Teams with Daniel Vacanti.
The Azure DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and running your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient, able to deliver world-class results. By the way, they are hiring architects as well as .NET engineers who'd like a path to become an architect. So you can go to clearmeasure.com/careers for that. And a special invitation, very, very soon, we will be on episode 200 of the Azure DevOps podcast. And so if you have enjoyed the podcast and would like to say something on episode 200, then just do a quick recording. You can send me an email, or you can write into the show, or you can tag me on Twitter. All those links, just look into the show notes. Or you can even call and leave a voicemail at 512-298-2377, and we'll be compiling those kind words and featuring it on show number 200. So look forward to that if you've enjoyed the show and you'd like to kind of be featured on the next one. Our guest today, however, is Daniel Vacanti, and he actually was with us back on show number 103. 2 years ago. So he's back, and he's a 20-year software industry veteran who got his start as a Java developer and architect, and he's spent most of the last 17 years now focused on Lean and Agile Practices. In 2007, he helped develop the Kanban Method for knowledge work. He even managed the world's first project implementation of Kanban that year, and ever since has been conducting Kanban training, coaching, consulting, etc. And as the founder and CEO of ActionableAgile, Daniel provides industry-leading predictive analytics tools and services for any Lean Agile process. Daniel, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
It's great to be back, Jeffrey. Thanks again for having me and for the invitation. It has been too long, and we were talking before the show. It's been a while. It was even longer than I thought. So just really glad to be back here.
Time flies. Time flies for sure. The summers are like 2 days now. Or I remember when I was a kid, summer lasted forever.
Yeah.
It's all perspective. Yeah. But a lot has happened since we spoke last. And by the way, we'll include the link to episode 103 in the show notes. But of course, you can go back in the show archives, listeners, and check that out. You've written, just refresh. You've written several books. You've done tons of consulting and projects on Agile. But for people who haven't seen the introduction in show 103. You're helping teams all over the place, or you're helping people manage high-performing software teams. Just a quick summary, how did you get into that? It's not something that people just come straight out of college. Oh, I think I'm going to consult helping people run software teams.
What's interesting about that is it's a bit of soapbox of mine that they don't teach you any of the right stuff in college, in school in general, but especially university as a professional. So coming out of college, I was a developer. I think just like your start, as a developer, and kind of graduated into architecture, as well. But it's one of those things. I think it happens to a lot of developers. If you're halfway good at it, sooner or later you get put on some type of management track. And I was on a team where the manager of the team essentially got fired, and there was nobody else to run the team, and so it was me. Everybody took two steps back, right? And so then I was the one who was volunteered for it. And, as a manager, my frustration, I saw this frustration when I started out as a developer, but as a manager, it kind of, quadrupled is, constantly being on these projects where plans and timelines were dictated to you, right? Where you didn't really get any input, but people would constantly, come up to you and tell you, okay, here's this project and you have to have it done by such and such a date, and then as a manager, you were expected to whip your team into shape if they weren't performing, the way that the plan said, even though you had no input in the plan.
Yeah.
And so, over the course of that time, I just kept thinking, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. This is stupid, right? There's got to be a better way. And kind of, I don't know, just serendipitously, I kind of stumbled upon Flow, and that's, I was, fortunate enough to be on that team at Corbis, where we started playing around with some of these Flow principles, and just kind of took off from there.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I think so many people struggle with, and that is being dictated timelines. Because the Agile Manifesto and so much of the Scrum teaching over 2 decades now has been, oh, no. We need to ask the development team, how long is it going to take? And then, the implicit is just accept that. So from there's maybe a CTO out there or a CEO listening, and it's like, look, I've got a business objective. If we can't meet such and such in the marketplace by the end of the summer, then why do I even have a software team? So I need to be able to dictate when I need something. How can you bridge that for us?
I think I can. I don't know how good a job I'll do at it, but absolutely. I mean, I think there are two things in there that you said are very true from a business perspective. The first one is just in general, the business side of the house does need to know when things are going to be done, right? I mean, that's a legitimate business question to ask. Whether we as developers or development teams like that question, is that's a completely different conversation, but it's a legitimate business question. And then further, there are certain business situations out there that demand certain work being done in a certain time frame. Again, that's just the world we live in. The way that I like to bridge that gap, however, is to always, I shouldn't say always, mostly, you're going to understand why I don't say always in a second, but to mostly talk about that in terms of risk. Yes, I understand there is this business need and there is maybe this drop dead date for this business need, but allow me to be able to frame our ability to deliver on that date in terms of risk, in terms of a probability chance of that actually happening. And then we can have a conversation about what do you want to do as a business to mitigate the risk, to eliminate the risk, to accept the risk, to do whatever. To me, that's the bridge. Is always think about this in terms of that risk. And once the business has both of those pieces of information, like the date that they're working toward and the risk of hitting that date, now I think we can have a much more what I always like to say, a much more adult conversation about how do we get there.
Okay.
I waved my hands a lot there. I think there's a lot. I think we can dig a little deeper into some of those things. So,
what would you say to developers who, and I've heard a lot of them who lament about kind of being told when they need to have things done. The developer that says, "No, you need to ask me how long it's going to take me, and then I will tell you." What mindset would you advise them to have on that? The problem with that approach, as I see it, is that, and this is a hard thing for me to accept for myself, but this is kind of human nature. Is that asking people themselves when will it be done, and having them rely on, say, their intuition or an educated guess or just a gut feel or whatever. The problem is, we as humans, as you've probably done several interviews about this. We as humans suffer from all kinds of biases, and we, at the best of times, we do not act rationally. And so we are going to give over-optimistic, estimates. If somebody were ask us when we're going to be done, we're going to give over-optimistic, estimates. We're going to bias toward, things that we want to happen versus, how we, acknowledging the real risks, that are out there.
which is one of the biggest reasons why I like, my preference is more of a data informed, approach. So you can take a look at, okay, rather than us, how do I feel it's going to be? You ask me how long it's going to take. Well, let's see what the data tells us, and maybe make informed decisions that way.
Okay, that's intriguing. How would one get that data? That almost sounds like the Scrum practices of planning poker and involving the team with how much do you think and putting those answers together versus, okay, someone has this source of data and they're just kind of come up with an answer in a different way. What does that mean?
Yeah. So it is very much the opposite, not to make it take too strong of a stance, but it's very much the opposite of the planning poker, estimating techniques that a lot of people associate with agile practices. Rightly or wrongly, they associate them with agile practices. The idea is that if I take a far enough step back, Scrum teams exist, developers exist, whatever. They exist to deliver value for a customer somewhere. Somewhere there's a customer that's waiting for them to deliver value, right? That's the whole reason that those things exist. And in order to deliver that value, somebody first has to have an idea of, hey, what do I think is valuable? Now that might come from the customer, that might come from a product owner, might come from a product manager, whatever. But somebody somewhere has an idea of, hey, I think this is going to be valuable for our customers.
Right.
Well, that piece of hypothetical value, we'll call it that, doesn't just magically and immediately become valuable, right? There's work that needs to be done to turn something that's intangible, this intangible idea, into something that's concrete and tangible for our customers. There's work that has to be done. That's what's known essentially as process or workflow, and so the data comes from measuring that workflow. If you are doing Scrum, you have used Scrum as a framework to put in place a process to turn ideas, intangible ideas, into concrete value for our customers. Hopefully, concrete values for our customers. And so, what we need to do is we need to first kind of map out that process, whatever that is. Like I said, whether you know it or not, that process exists, right? So, what we need to do is we need to map out that process, and by mapping out that process, we now can measure things like, okay, from when something starts to when something finishes, to when it's actually in the hands of the customer, or when it meets our definition of done, whatever that is. We can measure how long that takes. We can measure how many things we're getting to our customer per unit of time. We can measure how many things we're working on at a given time. There are basic, what I call basic metrics of flow that we can measure that will give us tremendous insight in terms of how our process is performing, but ultimately will help us to answer what you were just asking about. Well, how long is it going to take us to get done? How many things can we get done in the next release, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And I do want you to plug whatever products maybe there weren't. We always like to recommend products because I think from what I'm hearing you say, the common tracking tools don't give reports out of the box that kind of give you those answers, right?
For the most part, no. What's interesting is all of those tools that you're talking about, whether it's Jira, whether it's Azure DevOps, whatever, all those tools actually have the data. But what's interesting, you said kind of out of the box, or they give us the reports that we need based on that data. And that's where most of them do fall down. They might include, I think, and this is not just the same shameless plug for your show, but I think Azure DevOps actually does a little bit better job than Jira, but both of them, I think still suffer from the same problem, is that while behind the scenes they're collecting that flow data, they're not necessarily presenting that flow data to the user, in a consumable way. And I might even go so far as to say in a correctly consumable way.
Okay. Well, so many business leaders talk about concepts like a scorecard or dashboard with relevant metrics. Okay, in software, for putting that together, in your view, what is the correct way, the consumable way? What are those numbers that give the right visibility?
Yeah, and I guess I should I should. That's a great question, because I really should. You kind of called me out here. I should backtrack a little bit and say the metrics that I talk about there, and there are going to be 4 basic metrics that I talk about. I consider them the bare minimum. Like if you are in a flow context, these are the bare minimum that you need to track. Now, in your particular business context, above and beyond when we talk about flow, there are almost certainly going to be other metrics that you're going to need to track. Right. If we talk about scorecards and things like that. So I don't necessarily, when I say the things that I'm going to say, I don't want to necessarily say don't do any of those other things. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, if at a minimum you're not doing these things, you're probably in trouble. Like, a good analogy I like to say is, a pilot flying an airplane. There are basic things that every pilot wants to know. Airspeed, altitude, heading, right? Yeah. They're basic things that a pilot needs to know. And I would say the same thing is true of Agile teams. They're very, very basic things that teams want to know. But there's certainly more than what I talk about. I don't know, did you want me to get into those 4 things right now? Or,
yeah, and that is fair. If I was going into a new software group and I haven't even met them yet, but I'm going to be responsible for managing them, even before knowing anything specific about that domain or what they're doing, I would come in saying, okay, I need to find out information, and I would have something in my head for what I need to find out, the current state, current speed, or quality, or right. So yeah, respective of context, what are those that every manager of a software team should have at their disposal and be monitoring?
Yep. For me, those 4 things are, in no particular order. Number 1, work in progress. Just how many things are we working on right now?
Okay.
Number 2, and I guess we can get into maybe more specific definitions of these a little bit later. But so number 1 is work in progress. Number 2, throughput. How many things are we getting done per unit of time? Whatever unit of time that is. Number 3, cycle time. How long is it taking us to get things done from when we start something to when we finish? What's that total amount of elapsed time to get individual items done? And then lastly, and I would say for me, most importantly, is what is the age of items that we're working on right now? The things that we have in progress, how old are they, and why are they the age that they are? So,
is that age from the time you started, or is the age from somebody having the idea that we should do it at some point?
Well, and that's the very first thing. Before we can even measure these things, that's the first conversation we have to have is, what does it mean for us to have considered something to have started? And what does it mean for us to consider something to have finished? Is started, like you said, is started when somebody just has the idea, or is started from when we maybe pull it into the sprint, or is started from when we actually start working on it. Then maybe we pulled it into the sprint, but when we actually started working on it in the sprint, right? There's a lot of gray area there. And so we just need to decide, what is that point where we consider work to have started?
Yeah. Because it seems normal with almost every team that I've been involved with, where there will be the end of a milestone, the end of a project or whatnot, and there will be a whole bunch of cards in the tracking system that we just decided not to do because we found a way for them not to be relevant to achieving the goal.
Yep. And that's okay. As far as I'm concerned, that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, it was okay. Yeah. So having the idea that we should do it, shouldn't really be work in progress.
As far as I'm concerned, no, right? Because this is one of the fundamental problems with software development in particular, but I think any knowledge work, is that ideas are easy, right? And our ability to come up with ideas is always going to outstrip our ability to execute on them. Always. That's why backlogs grow over time, because everybody always says, hey, wouldn't it be great if? Wouldn't it be great if? And we just chuck a whole bunch of stuff into the backlog, and the backlog swells. And then, like you said, if we're really being agile, what we're really doing is, trying to optimize for what is that minimum set of stuff that we need to do to represent value. Okay. So I would agree. Just because somebody has an idea somewhere and we throw it in the backlog, should we really start the clock then? That seems dubious to me. But there might be good information from tracking that. Sorry, but go ahead. Yeah.
I did notice also that in those 4, none of them jumped out as any kind of quality number.
Yeah, and this is any metric can be gained, and I would say, if from the 4 metrics perspective anyway, if you are suffering from quality problems, those quality problems will be reflected in terms of both how long it takes us to get stuff done, as well as how many things we can get done. And probably, depending on how you're measuring this, probably more in that throughput number. Quality will show up more in that throughput number than in the cycle time number. People talk a lot about how do you balance these kind of performance metrics against some type of quality. For me, kind of being a professional is understanding that we put a premium on quality. That it's not something that we think about after the fact, and it's not necessarily something that is a second thought. I guess, just for lack of a better word. And so if we really care about quality, then those types of quality numbers, I think, will be reflected in cycle time and throughput. If, again, getting back to my earlier point, though, if you really feel like quality is something you're suffering from, then by all means, throw a quality metric into that mix.
Okay.
By all means.
Yeah. So minimum 4, or the start of the process, but not just those 4. I get it.
Yep.
Okay. So, all right. So a bunch of people out there using Azure DevOps, the Azure Boards component within it. They can't really get those 4 just straight out of the box. So, you've got a tool that helps with that, but just generally, what's the mix of tools, and what's the method to go from somebody using Azure DevOps to having those numbers at their disposal?
You got several options, really. Starting with, and if you're so inclined, even something as simple as a spreadsheet, because as we talked about before, the 2 pieces of data. To me, this is one of the reasons why these 4 metrics are kind of brilliant to track. The only 2 pieces of data that you need to calculate all of those metrics are, a timestamp for when something crosses that started point. Remember, we talked about having that well-defined start point. So we need a timestamp when something crosses that start point, and we need a timestamp when something crosses that finish point. As long as we just have those 2 pieces of data, we can calculate all of those flow metrics for every single item that flows through our process. So it could be as simple as dumping that data into a spreadsheet and just kind of doing it manually yourself. I did that for years, which is one of the reasons why I went and built a tool, because I kind of got sick of spreadsheet jockeying.
Yeah.
But you could legitimately just dump everything in a spreadsheet and do it yourself. But then you can graduate to, like I said, I built a tool called ActionableAgile Analytics that has a plugin for Azure DevOps that behind the scenes just goes and does that, just goes and mines all the data for you and presents it, in certain charts as well. I think Azure DevOps has its own kind of built-in, analytics and reporting.
They all have the built-in reports, but not just out of the box. Okay, here's these 4 metrics.
Yeah, you would have to I think you would have to go in and you would have to configure. But again, that is an option. It's just, where really do you want to, as a software development team, where do you want to be investing your time? Is it really tweaking Azure DevOps, or is it actually focusing on delivering, customer value?
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
Okay, so you've got a product that kind of gives the dashboard there. For a lot of teams, they'll have a Kanban style board with, could be 9 different columns from, we're doing business analysis, now we're doing technical design, now we're doing test design, now we're coding, now we're doing internal testing, customer testing, getting ready for production. So a bunch of statuses that a lot of people are using that Kanban flow of moving a card kind of horizontal across columns. Every team is configuring those columns differently. So how does the Actionable Agile tool help when every team's board is totally different?
Well, there's, I mean, you've got a couple of options because number one, each team can go in and can mine their own data, so when they pull up the Actionable Agile tool, it will show them whatever statuses they have mapped. Another option would be, and again, you have to forgive me because I personally am not that familiar with Azure DevOps. So maybe I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but another thing that you could do is I assume Azure DevOps has something like an epic board or something like that, maybe where all teams are working on epics.
It's pretty comparable to Jira from a board perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, you could amongst all those teams maybe decide a workflow at the epic level that is common to everybody. It could be something as simple as to do, doing, and done. You don't necessarily have to get much more complicated than that, although there's some reasons why you may want to or may not want to. And that would maybe be one way that we could see see data across all of the teams. At one company I worked with, they what they said is you have to have, they were using Jira, and they said you have to have these two statuses on your Jira board. This is a status that we consider work to have started, and this is the status, and that was the same for all the teams. But how teams mapped their process in between those 2 points was left completely up to the teams themselves. So they kind of gave them flexibility that way. So like I said, I think you're really only limited by your imagination in terms of how you want to implement this stuff. I don't know that any of this stuff is really rocket surgery.
Rocket surgery. All right. Awesome. Okay. So that's flow. What other parts of your practice have kind of had movement over the last 2 years? Have things stabilized? Because it was when the Agile Manifesto first came out, everyone's arguing over everything. And then Scrum, should we do TDD development? And the argument, pair programming, we should do pair programming. And now very few people do pair programming after all. But just, which things are still in flux and which things have kind of stabilized?
Well, for me, one of the things we didn't talk about too much in the intro is I had an opportunity to co-found a new community called prokanban.org, which its whole purpose is to provide a safe, inclusive, diverse space for people to come and learn about flow, some of these concepts that we've been talking about. And for me, that's really kind of in flux because, and this is great for me to come on a show where we can talk about software development, is because if you look at the evolution of software development over the past 20 years, and especially our engineering practices in software development, there has been a decided movement toward making your practices more continuous. If we talk about 20 years ago, nobody was doing continuous integration, right? But now they look at you if you have 3 heads, if you're not doing continuous integration. Same thing with continuous deployment. I would argue the whole rise of the DevOps movement was to make deployments a lot more continuous. So I mean, our engineering practices, we've known for a long time in software development that continuous is good. It is a good thing. For whatever reason, we haven't known in software engineering, or we haven't embraced it, that if your engineering practices are continuous, your process should be continuous as well. And your process should reflect that, that continuous. For whatever reason, we still want to make our process very, very batchy. With,
like
with all due respect,
start.
Yeah, with all due respect to Scrum and with all due respect to Safe, there's still very, very, very batch heavy processes. And so that's really kind of one of the things that's, in addition to the safe space for learning about flow, it's trying to get people to understand is your engineering practices have evolved. Well, your process needs to evolve right along with it. And a lot of the dissonance that you're seeing in your ability to deliver is because your process can't cope with, how good you're getting at your engineering practices. My 2 cents anyway.
Sure. And I've heard it said that, that if you keep on making your Scrum implementation smaller, that it ends up being Kanban. And someone, I've heard it quipped by multiple people. Yeah, and eventually you get to weekly sprints, and then you get to daily sprints, and then it's like, what's the point anymore?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly a kind of That's a rough generalization, but I think it's a legitimate question to ask. Is because the Scrum Guide specifically says, hey, we want to be able to deliver value in 1 month or less. But as we know, most Scrum teams, have their sprint lengths much, much shorter than that because they understand the value of fast feedback. And the Scrum Guide even goes further and says, that doesn't mean that, like say if you have 2-week sprints, that you're only delivering once during that 2-week sprints. You can deliver as many times, and it even encourages you. So if you go and read the Scrum Guide, it actually reads a lot like a flow document to me, because I have kind of a Kanban lens. It reads to me like a flow document. And so then I think it's legitimate to start questioning some of the batchiness that is still kind of built into Scrum. I think that's a legitimate question to ask. Now, I don't think that necessarily means dumping a lot of the Scrum practices, because there's a lot of great stuff there. I mean, a lot of flow teams, if you've dealt with a Kanban team, you know that they still do daily scrums. I mean, they probably call them stand-ups, but they still do daily scrums. They're still doing retrospectives. They're still probably setting goals. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So I think, you get a really, really good mature Scrum team. You get a really, really good mature Kanban team. From the outside, the layperson really probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah. Organizationally, what do you see is the best practices, or the things that are kind of should be rules of thumb now regarding managing production? Because some number of years ago, you would have been crazy. Developer having access to the production, small teams, it's kind of like everybody does everything. But as far as mature teams that have gotten a little bit bigger, they start to segment. What's your view on team composition versus cross-functional responsibilities, and then the whole, ops responsibilities versus dev responsibilities, and then the whole security, and people saying, no, it should be DevSecOps, and DevSec test ops, and all that.
I will be completely honest with you. I'm probably out of my depth when it comes to organizational design and development. I have an opinion on everying,
That's what we want.
I'm happy to share my opinion. But this we are really, really reaching the limits of my competence when we start.
No, it's all you. The listener is firmly in control of the mute button, so let her rip.
So sure. I mean, my general preference in terms of like some of the things that you're talking about, just in general, when we talk about scaling, my general solution to scaling is to not. Every time I hear organizations talking about, well, we need to scale. I always really want to know why. Do we really? I hear so much of growth for growth's sake. And what is it really buying us? So to that point, if we talk about cross-functional teams and everything like that, this is where I very much believe in what Scrum would say is, if I'm putting together a team, I want that team to have all the skills on it that is able to take that customer idea and put it into production, actually put it into the hands of the customer. I don't necessarily want, siloed built-in dependencies and things like that. I want that team to be as cross-functional as possible. There's in terms of developers deploying into production too. I'm a big fan of that, because that, to me, that's the best way to learn. I'm going to admit this to you. I don't know that I've admitted this to anybody else.
It's just you and me here. Just you and me.
Yeah. But when we were building ActionableAgile, we had 0 tests. We did not have a test week. We had 0 tests.
Okay.
We would build it and we would just push it to production. That's what we would do. I would very roughly maybe click around on a few things before we deployed, but for the most part, no automated tests, no unit tests, no nothing. We had absolutely nothing, and it worked beautifully for us, because what would happen is, if a bug got into production, then our customers would report it, and we would fix it immediately. We were running a flow system, so we could prioritize our bug fixes, and we could fix those bug fixes immediately.
Yeah.
And I have to say that allowed us to develop a much closer rapport with our customers, being able to operate that way. What I found anyway, and again, your mileage may vary, but what I found is our customers weren't expecting perfect code all the time. That's not what they were expecting. All they were expecting was to be listened to. When they found something, they wanted to know that they were taken seriously. And for us anyway, that was a much better approach in terms of our software development. So I know I kind of got off topic there, but that was kind of an interesting finding that.
No, that's a good point. For the scale of software where 1-2 people can do the whole thing, then the selection of practices, you have flexibility.
Yeah.
Where some other domains like monetary transactions, like, oh, sorry, did we put the wrong amount? And I'll fix that bug, no problem. So the selection of practices has different forces on the software, and you have leeway in certain places.
To be fair, we were not talking about life and death for our software. Totally. This is not life and death for sure. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. So we could afford to do some of those things. Yeah.
Well, you make an interesting point as we kind of wrap up here. The why scale, and of course the CEO is saying, well, we're going to scale because we're increasing volume, revenue's going up. Yes, we are going to take on this new business. So find a way to scale. It's like, okay, do we vertically segment? Do we horizontally segment? Do we vertically scale? Do we horizontally scale? It sounds like you're saying, don't just grow the number of people on a team. Find some other way.
Yeah. And because almost certainly there is another way. Mm-hmm. And most of the things that those, not to beat up on CEOs too much, but most of the things that the CEOs are talking about probably aren't valuable anyway. I mean, that's probably where I would start the objection is this thing really valuable that we go after?
Well, it's fair to beat up on leaders because it's the job of a leader to take the blame when something goes wrong and to give away all the credit when something goes right. That's just the job.
Been there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as we close out, is there anything else that we should touch on or point the listeners to? We'll include the Actionable Agile, prokanban.com, your book in the show notes. Anything else we should point the listeners to before we close out?
Yeah, not really. I just want to reemphasize the invitation. If you're wanting to learn a little bit more about Kanban and you're kind of interested in more of these flow practices, there is that open invitation to come out to Pro Kanban and check out what we're doing. Probably the very first thing to do is to join our Slack community. If you go to the prokanban.org website, there's a way to join our Slack community. So please get involved. We love to hear from new and different voices. So we'd love to see you there.
Awesome. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for coming back on the show. Again, listeners, you can go back to show 103. But appreciate you coming back and sharing the latest with us.
Jeffrey, thanks so much for the invitation. And I hope this isn't the last time we talk. I hope we get a chance to do a lot more of these in the future. So thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.